Hi everybody, welcome to this episode of the series How Do I Find My Way Through the Jungle of Culture? For all of you that know also my German edition of the same series, please note that this is not just a translation, and I'm not talking about the same things. I'm starting from a completely different point, which is also a main argument which I want to prove with this series, which is that we can start from any point, and if we just follow certain rules of thinking and if we follow our heart, we can find our way out of this jungle of culture. So today we want to start from an argument which is not some side argument, it's not something like light or superficial, it's a really heavy argument. We want to talk about atheism. So we go right to the center of a huge cause of infinite discussions. And because the argument is so heavy and severe and serious, I am not shaved today because I hope this makes me look a little bit older and maybe more convincing. You never know. We must try everything. So, some of my atheist friends have recommended to me several times a very famous author and professor who has written many books. He's an English professor, but has been teaching also in the United States at the Berkeley University. And he is called Richard Dawkins. So my atheist friends, they believe that his books are so powerful that I just have to read one of them and I will awaken to the same truth like they have and become finally an atheist. The big problem with me personally is that I have already been an atheist, and so I'm like in the opposite direction, and I really cannot awaken to be an atheist anymore. But my atheist friends, the problem is they don't accept that kind of direction. They accept only the direction from religion, like primitive, naive, childish religious belief, to the adult, mature, scientific-based truth of atheism. So it's really not easy to discuss with an atheist. And today I want to not to discuss with some like mediocre atheist, but like with one of the top atheists of planet Earth, Richard Dawkins. Of course he's not here, but I can read one of his most famous books, which he wrote in 1976, which is called The Selfish Gene. And considering how many more atheists there are since the 1970s, this book must be pretty convincing. There are I have done some research. There are many places in the world, in Europe or in the West, where the percentage of atheists in the last 30-40 years has gone from almost zero to up to 80%. So there must be something really convincing in this kind of thinking. And that's what we want to examine today, how convincing this kind of thinking truly is. Or is it just convincing because maybe our thinking is not so scientific and not so precise as we believe it to be? So I think a good starting point is to read a little bit about Richard Dawkins himself. And we have here Wikipedia, which explains to us about his early life. Clinton Richard Dawkins was born on 26 March 1941 in Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, during British colonial rule. Blah, 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 blah. His father was called up into the King's African Rifles during the Second World War and returned to England in 1949 when Dawkins was 8. His father had inherited a country estate, blah blah. One important thing about finding your way through culture is not reading everything, because if you want to read every detail, you will never finish. It's like exactly like getting your way through the jungle. If you want to look at every single tree, every single plant and animal, oh, look at that flower, oh, look at the tree, oh, look at the bird, oh, the monkey's jumping. Like, if you want to observe every detail, you will never get out of the jungle. So just go, keep a good pace. Let's not rush, but let's not stop. So keep going, keep thinking, and never stop. So stop, but you can stop, but not stop thinking. Okay. So let's go on. His parents were interested in natural science, and they answered Dawkins' questions in scientific terms. Dawkins describes his childhood as a normal Anglican upbringing. He embraced Christianity until halfway through his teenage years, at which point he concluded that the theory of evolution alone was a better explanation for life's complexity, and ceased believing in God. Dawkins states, "The main residual reason why I was religious was from being so impressed with the complexity of life and feeling that it had to have a designer. And I think it was when I realized that Darwinism was a far superior explanation that pulled the rug out from under the argument of design. And that left me with nothing." So, I mean, what is the guy stating actually here? He's telling us that the world and all creatures cannot be created by God because it's too complicated. So life in the universe is so incredibly complicated that never a God, a conscious a conscious being could have created all that. I mean, you see, this is not a very strong argument, especially when it comes from a 16-year-old boy who just had gone through a basic education in Christianism, maybe from his parents a little bit, maybe from the church, maybe from school. He got some basics. What he understood was very little. The world in front of him was incredibly complex, and he says, with the little things I know, I cannot explain all the world that I see around myself. So that's why there cannot be any God. I mean, if you think about it, he's actually saying that he already understood God, and God is not intelligent enough to create the world. That's why there is no God. So, but it gets even more interesting here later on. This understanding of atheism, combined with his Western cultural background, informs Dawkins, as he describes himself in several interviews, as a cultural Christian or a cultural Anglican. So, although he does not believe in God, he likes the Christian culture and he wants to be with the good guys. He wants to be a Christian, but he wants to be a Christian without believing in any superior being called the Christ. So it's interesting to see this psychological starting point of that really famous professor. So I think it's good now to go a little bit into his most famous book, which is The Selfish Gene. And in the start of the book, he states himself that although he has written many books afterwards, this remains still his most important book. And even now, after so many years, he would not change almost anything in that book. He still believes in everything that he is stating here. So, usually I'm not a great fan of introductions because, as I already told you, we have to be a little bit faster to get out of this jungle of cultural illusions. So let's now, still there's a preface to the second edition. I skip everything. I want to start with the first chapter. That's how I usually read books, and maybe if I like really a lot the book, I can read afterwards the introduction, the preface. Okay, chapter 1. Why are people? Intelligent life on a planet comes of an age when it first works out the reason for its own existence. If superior creatures from space ever visit Earth, the first question they will ask in order to assess the level of our civilization is, have they discovered evolution yet? Living organisms had existed on Earth without ever knowing why for over 3,000 million years before the truth finally dawned on one of them. His name was Charles Darwin. So, as you can see, he's starting like with a pretty bold statement that for 3,000 million of years there were living creatures on Earth and nobody knew why until Charles Darwin discovered the truth. From this bold statement, you can understand why it's not really easy to have a discussion with any atheist, because, I mean, after such a statement, what can you say? What can you say? He has the truth. And he also knows how long the truth was not known, which is exactly 3,000 million of years. Even this is a pretty bold statement from someone to know how long our past lasted, because 3,000 million of years is pretty long, pretty long. So the guy, Charles Darwin, after 3,000 million of years, finally discovered the truth and discovered that everything can be explained with his evolutionary theory. Okay, Dawkins goes on. To be fair, others... he wants to be fair, because he's a cultural Christian. To be fair, others had inklings of the truth, but it was Darwin who first put together a coherent and tenable account of why we exist. An account which, as he stated in another book, has left him with nothing. So Darwin gives us nothing, but this nothing can explain everything, and that's why it's the truth. Okay, let's go on. Darwin made it possible for us to give a sensible answer to the curious child whose question heads this chapter. We no longer have to resort to superstition when faced with the deep problems. Is there a meaning of life? What are we for? What is a man? After posing the last of these questions, the eminent zoologist G.G. Simpson put it thus: the point I want to make now is that all attempts to answer that question before 1859, which must be the date when the book of Darwin, the evolutionary theory, was first published, are worthless, and that we will be better off if we ignore them completely. So let's ignore everything, whatever anybody on planet Earth has found out or thought, or any kind of knowledge existed before 1859, because now we know the truth, and that's it. But he wants to be fair. Today, the theory of evolution is about as much open to doubt as the theory that the Earth goes around the sun. So he's like totally sure about the fact that the Earth goes around the sun, and the same sure is the theory of evolution. But the full implications of Darwin's revolution have yet to be widely realized. Zoology is still a minority subject in universities. So you see already before he was saying, is there a meaning of life? What are we for, we human beings? What is a man? And then talks a eminent zoologist, and he continues talking about zoology. So obviously he considers human beings to be nothing but intelligent animals, which is the most common point of view amongst all atheists, because the distinction between a human being and an animal is actually what makes atheism impossible. That's why all atheists insist that human beings are animals. Zoology is still a minority subject in universities, and even those who choose to study it often make their decision without appreciating its profound philosophical significance. Philosophy and the subjects known as humanities, written like this, because there is no humanity, as I already explained, are still taught almost as if Darwin had never lived. Oh, poor Darwin, we are not appreciating the lonely holder of the truth. No doubt this will change in time. We all need just a little bit more time to become as intelligent as Darwin and as intelligent as Richard Dawkins. In any case, this book is not intended as a general advocacy of Darwinism. No, not at all. After all he said until now, it's a very objective point of view. Darwinism is just one of many options, but of course it's the only and absolute truth. Instead, it will explore the consequences of the evolution theory for a particular issue. My purpose is to examine the biology of selfishness and altruism. So, what is really bothering him in this world is the biology of selfishness and altruism. He wants, obviously, to explain selfishness and altruism as a result of some biological reality, something inherent in our biological structure. Apart from its academic interest, the human importance of this subject is obvious. At this point now he accepts there is something like a human level of importance, and it's really important for us, although we don't exist. Although we are animals, the human subject is really important. It touches every aspect of our social lives, our loving and hating, fighting and cooperating, giving and stealing, our greed and our generosity. So it seems Richard Dawkins was a little bit troubled with human reality and with all our passions, emotions, and our tendencies towards egoistical behavior but also altruistic behavior. These are claims that could have been made for Lawrence on aggression, arteries, the social contract, and Eibelsfeld's love and hate. Sorry guys, all of the three books are unknown to me. The trouble with these books is that their authors got it totally and utterly wrong. Wow, probably they have been written before 1859, so maybe it's not their fault. The trouble with these books is that their authors got it totally wrong. They got it wrong because they misunderstood how evolution works. Okay, so there was already the truth in the world, but they misunderstood it. But Richard Dawkins will help us with this now. They made the erroneous assumption that the important thing in evolution is the good of the species or the group, rather than the good of the individual or the gene. It is ironic that Ashley Montagu should criticize Lawrence as a direct descendant of the nature red in tooth and claw thinkers of the 19th century. Okay. Although all of these guys are unknown to me, we understand that in the 19th century there was like a extreme movement of materialistic thinking because everybody was so enthusiastic about this new Darwinistic evolutionary theory. And what is commonly known today as social Darwinism is based on this idea of Darwin that evolution is the result of competition. And because Richard Dawkins wants to give us another edition of Darwinism, he's telling us here that he doesn't want to talk about this kind of Darwinism, which would be the nature red in tooth and claw Darwinism, which is like animals eating each other, red because smeared with blood. He wants to tell us that he's not like one of them, but he wants to share with us another kind of Darwinistic, Darwin-based theory. As I understand Lawrence's view of evolution, he would be very much at one with Montagu. Okay, this is not interesting because we don't know Montagu or Tennyson or Lawrence, so let's go on. Before beginning on my argument itself, I want to explain briefly what sort of an argument it is and what sort of an argument it is not. That's really nice of him. So he wants right now tell us his basic argument, so maybe we can avoid reading the entire book. And I want to explain why he does this, because he's not, in his eyes, he's not like presenting to us a philosophy, like a worldview, which must convince you slowly and like get you ready, and then at a certain point in the middle of the book tells you what is its main argument. But because as an atheist he is like convinced that he's not a believer in a world view, but that he is the holder of the truth, of the scientific truth, which he has stated right from the start. So as a holder of the truth, there is no need to surprise us and to convince us slowly. He can just tell us the truth and then spend the rest of the book with giving us all the necessary arguments and proofs. So he goes on. If we were told that a man had lived a long and prosperous life in the world of Chicago gangsters, we would be entitled to make some guesses as to the sort of man he was. We might expect that he would have qualities such as toughness, a quick trigger finger, and the ability to attract loyal friends. These would not be infallible deductions. He's so objective, such a scientist. But you can make some inferences about a man's character if you know something about the conditions in which he has survived and prospered. The argument of this book is that there we go. The argument of this book is that we and all other animals, as I told you, we are animals, are machines created by our genes. That's a nice one. So we are machines created by whom? By our genes. This is the central argument of the book. Like successful Chicago gangsters, our genes have survived in some cases for millions of years in a highly competitive world. It's so great that Dawkins, he knows millions of years back that our world was competitive. It's unbelievable what you can know through science. This entitles us to expect certain qualities in our genes. So I shall argue that a predominant quality to be expected in a successful gene is ruthless selfishness. Because, you understand what he's saying, eh? I mean, because we are so bad and evil and so selfish, and because we are machines created by our genes, we can, wow, this is like really intelligent thought, we can presuppose that our genes are also evil. So actually this makes us maybe not evil, but our genes evil, but we are built by our genes who wants us to be evil to protect themselves and to serve their selfishness. But on the other side, maybe, I don't know where he wants to arrive with this book. As we already know that he's a cultural Christian, probably he wants to reach the point to say that we can like escape the evil dominance of our genes and to become good guys. Probably. So let's not make too many speculations. Let's see what he says here following the previous sentence. This gene, selfishness, will usually give rise to selfishness in individual behavior. However, as we shall see, there are special circumstances in which a gene can achieve its own selfish goals best by fostering a limited form of altruism at the level of individual animals. Okay, so like the very evil gene can also behave altruistically because it could serve its interests. That's also a very common thought, that altruistic behavior must not be always because of goodness, but because of a clever decision that behaving altruistically can be of our own best interest. Special and limited are important words in the last sentence. Much as we might wish to believe otherwise, universal love and the welfare of the species as a whole are concepts that simply do not make evolutionary sense. This brings me to the first point I want to make about what this book is not. I'm not advocating a morality based on evolution. I am saying how things have evolved. I'm not saying how we humans morally ought to behave. I stress this because I know that I am in danger of being misunderstood by those people, all too numerous, who cannot distinguish a statement of belief in what is the case from an advocacy of what ought to be the case. My own feeling is that a human society based simply on the gene's law of universal ruthless selfishness would be a very nasty society in which to live. But unfortunately, however much we may deplore something, it does not stop being true. This book is mainly intended to be interesting, but if you would extract a moral from it, read it as a warning. Be warned that if you wish, as I do, to build a society in which individuals cooperate generously and unselfishly towards a common good, you can expect little help from biological nature. Let us try to teach generosity and altruism because we are born selfish. Let us understand what our own selfish genes are up to, because we may then at least have the chance to upset their designs, something that no other species has ever aspired to. So, you see, he's talking about the genes like small little devils, which are the creators of us. So the creator is not anymore out of us, but it's within of us. But it is like a small little creature called the gene, which is from inside has created around himself the human being to serve its selfish purpose. And even if sometimes this little small devil may decide to behave socially, and our behavior based on our genes may resemble love and altruism, we should not expect too much from it, because in the end, what we are genetical is like a selfish, self-protecting ego machine, and everything else, what we aspire to, like love and social harmony, is something we must do out of our own decision and always against our biological nature. That's a pretty far-stretched idea of human life. If you think about it, there are like pretty many thought traps from the gene to our ideas of social life and love, we really must wonder where these ideas come from. I mean, if we are machines, if we are like ego machines guided by small little devilish genes, how come that we have reached the level of thinking about nice behavior, altruism, and love? It's really weird, right? That the machine starts a completely different behavior from what it was programmed for. But, you know, in our days, fortunately, we already have an explanation also for this. Artificial intelligence. We are machines, but as machines, we are starting to have our own life. Now, how do we get out of this mess? I think maybe it's a good idea to check what the gene is, because gene is like presented to us like a magic thing. There is this gene, it's the rule of everything, and we are created by the gene. So I think it would be pretty interesting to know what a fucking gene is. So let's again consult our beloved Wikipedia and read about the genes. But before we get into the gene stuff, I will go to shave myself. And now you already know that I'm a wise elder guy, so I think it's the time to get shaved, and I will be back soon. Okay, so I'm back, shaved, which reminds me of a book that I wanted to write many years ago, which would have the title, The Importance of the Razor Blade for Human Evolution. Fortunately, I never wrote that book. So let's see in Wikipedia what we can find out about genes. And we want to know what this famous gene, of which Richard Dawkins is talking, what this gene actually is. What is a gene? What is it made of? Right? Isn't it an important question? If the gene is our creator, don't I want to know what the gene is? I think it's interesting. So, they say in biology, the word gene, from Greek genos, meaning generation or birth or gender, can have several different meanings. The Mendelian gene is a basic unit of heredity. Molecular gene is a sequence of nucleotides in DNA that is transcribed to produce a functional RNA. There are two types of molecular genes: protein coding genes and non-coding genes. Okay, here they go a lot into the function now. And they go into the function of a gene. But what we want to know actually is what a gene is, what it's made of. And we can see here a molecular gene, which is obviously the more modern opinion about genes, which is a gene is made of molecules. So that's what we are interested in, is a sequence of nucleotides. So let's see what nucleotides are. Nucleotides are organic molecules consisting of a nucleoside and a phosphate. They serve as a monomeric they serve as monomeric units of the nucleic acid polymers, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. So that's where the word DNA comes from deoxyribonucleic acid, and ribonucleic acid, RNA, both of which are essential biomolecules within all life forms on Earth. So there are molecules. Molecules are composed by many atoms, but these molecules are biomolecules. They have the difference from the other molecules that we find them within life forms. So they are like living molecules. Of course, no atheist will ever be able to explain to us how we passed from the non-living molecules to the living molecules, but let's not go into this argument today. Let's focus on the composition of genes and what they are made of. We can see here there are organic molecules consisting of a nucleoside and a phosphate. So let's see what the nucleoside is and what the phosphate is. A nucleosides are glycosylamines that can be thought of as nucleotides without a phosphate group. A nucleoside consists simply of a nucleobase and a 5-carbon sugar, also called ribose, whereas a nucleotide is composed of a nucleobase, a 5-carbon sugar, and 1 or more phosphate groups. So we have the nucleobase, we have the 5-carbon sugar, and we have the phosphate groups. So let's see what the nucleobase is. Nucleobases are known as nitrogenous bases, or often simply bases, as nitrogen-containing biological compounds that form nucleosides, which, in turn, are components of nucleotides, with all of these monomers constituting the basic building blocks of nucleic acids. So you see, what we usually learn at school is that DNA is built of nucleic acids, but here we go into more detail and we find out that the nucleic acids are made of nucleobases, which contain nitrogen. So let's see what is nitrogen. Nitrogen is the chemical element with the symbol N and atomic number 7. Nitrogen is a non-metal and the lightest member of group 15 of the periodic table, often called the pnictogens. It is a common element in the universe, estimated at 7th in total abundance in the Milky Way and the solar system. So you see, science is like, wow, I mean, it's not enough for them to tell us about the nitrogen on Earth, but they already know how much nitrogen there is in the Milky Way. And it's in an element, a chemical element, which is very abundant everywhere. It's the number 7 in maximum abundance. At standard temperature and pressure, 2 atoms of the element bond to form N2, a colorless and odorless diatomic gas. N2 forms about 78% of Earth's atmosphere, making it the most abundant uncombined element. So nitrogen is found as a gas in our atmosphere. It makes 78% of the Earth's atmosphere gases, and obviously the genes are built partially from nitrogen. We have found out now one chemical element which is a constituent of the gene. So let's go back and see the other elements. There was also the 5-carbon sugar, which is called ribose or 2-deoxyribose. Ribose is a simple sugar and carbohydrate with the molecular formula C5H10O5. So, and it is a component of the ribonucleotides from which RNA is built. So we have found now another 2 chemical elements, carbon and hydrogen. So we have already nitrogen, we have carbon, and we have hydrogen. Let's see also the third one, which was phosphate, because the nucleotides are always combined with a phosphate group. So let's see what the phosphate group is. In chemistry, a phosphate is an anion salt functional group or ester derived from a phosphoric acid. It commonly means orthophosphate, a derivative of orthophosphoric acid. This leads us further to finding out what a phosphoric acid is. A phosphoric acid, in the general sense, is a phosphorus oxoacid in which each phosphorus P is the symbol atom is in the oxidation state +5 and is bonded to 4 oxygen atoms. Okay, so we have found another chemical element, phosphorus, which is combined with oxygen. So we have now oxygen, phosphorus, hydrogen, nitrogen, and carbon. So let's stop here before we become too expert in chemistry. And let's just state that we have found 5 chemical elements which compose the so-called gene. And now the big question is, how come that these 5 chemical elements, which in nature exist like gases or like liquids and are non-living entities, how come not only they behave like a living being, so they form a biological molecule, but they are also so incredibly intelligent that they can create an entire human being, which is such a complicated task that not even God can do that. So Richard Dawkins here is actually telling us that even if we imagine the highest being of the universe with the highest intelligence, an omnipotent being, we cannot imagine that such a being called God could ever create the complexity of all the nature which is surrounding us and our own nature, of course. But if we take 5 chemical elements, which are actually gases or liquids or minerals, and we combine them in a certain way, these 5 elements are able to impose themselves, of course not immediately, but if we wait just a little bit. I think he was talking about thousands of millions of years. I actually don't know how someone can measure years if millions of so-called years there was no planet Earth, because we were still in the original dust after the Big Bang. But anyway, let's say really long time ago, out of the Big Bang, boom, come all the chemical elements. Between these elements, there are like 5 chemical elements. So let's say at least these 5, which combine each other, and just by chance they form the DNA or the gene. And this gene is so incredibly selfish and also intelligent, obviously, at the same time, that it can create all this complex world in which we are living, which is so complex that not even God could create. So besides the fact that this theory is pretty optimistic, it puts us in front of another question also. If we are created by our genes, but the genes are not the initial atoms of creation, but the genes are themselves created by chemical elements, by atoms, like hydrogen, nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, phosphor. So maybe also the genes are good guys and just victims of their creators. Maybe it's wrong to say that the genes are selfish. Maybe the genes are in the same difficult situation like us. Maybe they are moral. Maybe we have moral genes, but they are victims of their own creators, which are the atoms. Think about it. Obviously, Richard Dawkins never thought about it. That's why he's annoying us with this kind of theories. One problem with this kind of scientists is that we always suppose that they have done a lot of thinking before they write a book. Actually, it's not the case. And if you observe well, he is stating himself that he started his way of thinking when he was like 15, 16 years old. So how much thinking can he have done until his puberty? Okay, so to end this video, I would like to recapitulate a little bit what goes on in the mind of a religious person and what goes on in the mind of an atheist. So, in a very general term, a religious person starts with the idea of a God, of a creator, he continues then to think about creation. He continues to think that we are souls, that God created a world in which he created us as souls, that in the start there was a union, that we were in harmony with God. And then, especially in our Christian religion, we start to think about the original sin. We start to think about a separation from God. We start to think about a materialization of creation. We start to think that we become more attached to our bodies and that we turn away from the spirit because we imagine God like a spirit. And because of our more material and physical and bodily condition, we develop certain morally bad habits like selfishness. And then comes religion from prophets, from the side of prophets, from inspired people, from spiritual teachers, which is teaching us about our origin. And religion means that return to God, we should connect again with God. So religion is teaching us how to return to our original condition. And what do we find as an obstacle? It's our selfishness, our, let's say, the pleasures that we have found because of the sin, because of the separation, because of the separate condition in which we can exploit each other, which contains a certain pleasure. So religion usually teaches us how to overcome selfishness through altruism, through caring about our fellow human beings, about animals, plants, to develop our love for creation. And in the end, all these efforts should lead us back to be reunited with God and to live in harmony. And then in some editions of religion, this is connected with the idea of individuality. So at the end, we will be free individuals who have chosen to follow God, to love God out of our free will, because we have internalized the laws of God. We are not anymore following these laws just because we have to, but because we want to. And in the end, we are in a conscious and harmonic union with God. So on the other side, atheists, they start, for some reason, with a different base, which is the idea that there is no God, which is actually not hard to come to this conclusion, because at the first moment in this world, especially when you look at it from a natural scientific point of view, there is no God. So you start from the idea that there is no God, so you must think about an evolution without any creator. So the separation, which for religious people comes after the original sin, is for atheists it's an original separation. It's like inherent in our original condition. So after the Big Bang, there has been no connection. We are all separate. So the creation starts from infinite separate points, which can be nothing else than the chemical elements that we just were talking about. So there's like a dust of atomic molecules, and during time, they always put a lot of time, because otherwise it really becomes impossible to imagine such combinations. But they say, yeah, if we just wait long enough, then this world can come out of this accidental combination. So you have these elements that we still find around us, like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphor, etc. And they combine each other. And at a certain point, they start to behave like living beings. That's a point that all atheists avoid to go too much into. They say, yeah, it just happened. So there is this passing point from non-living to living. And then the only, let's say, willpower, which an atheist can imagine in such a living being, is selfishness, because this being is created out of itself. The origin of its existence is within himself. It has life because certain chemical elements have accidentally combined to form a living creature. And then starts the competition. And then these simple beings start to compete. And because of, let's say, a comparative advantage, there are created the so-called species. So some life forms start to collaborate to form a species and to fight against another species, and there is a competition, but sometimes there can be also a collaboration. But the final goal is always the selfish goal of survival, because, of course, if you don't know where you're coming from, it's pretty important to survive, because if you die, if the species disappears, it can never come back, because there is no God. So you just have what you have. You have your actual life and nothing else. So that's why, evolutionary theory is pretty stressing. So out of this, let's say, competition, always evolve higher evoluted, more complicated beings. And if we wait long enough, at the end, there are we human beings, and we come to a certain point where we start to have self-consciousness. This is also another point atheists always try to avoid, because it's the same unexplainable, like the passage from non-living to living is the passage from non-conscious to let's say non-self-conscious to self-conscious. And because of our self-consciousness, we start to become aware of our life condition, and we start to have what is called psychological life. And then, when we are so incredibly intelligent, like Richard Dawkins, we even come to the recognition that we are evil because our creators are evil, which are the genes, and we are machines who must serve selfish little genes who try to survive in a universe without creator. But strangely, as human beings, we have this tendency to be loving and to care for our fellow beings, and to have all these qualities which are called the Christian qualities. And although we are not believing in Christ, our psychological human life is so much connected to these Christian values that even when we are atheists, we don't want to renounce. In the case of Richard Dawkins, others, they do renounce. We don't want to renounce to be at least cultural Christians. So we say there is no Christ, but we want to be Christians. We want to follow these ideals. So we are not yet Christians, but we are trying to become Christians. And yes, the funny thing is that any serious Christian would never say, I am a Christian, but he would say, I'm trying to become a Christian. So in the end, we completely agree, but unfortunately, not from the side of the atheist. The atheist is a fighter against superstition, and everyone who has not understood that Charles Darwin is the start of the absolute truth is a person who is not educated enough. Okay, that's all today about Richard Dawkins, and let's see what else we can discover in the following videos. Bye.